Welcome to the ACC Panic Room alongside
What?
Lauren Brownlow.
Yeah.
What, what are you supposed to be like the Phantom of the Coastal? Coming back to haunt Atlantic fans one last time before they go to divisionless play?
I think I'm just sort of an amalgamation of stuff I thought looked cool for Halloween. Really. Like my RIP gender norms earrings, you know, throwing it in with some fake tattoos. Yeah. It all
Yeah,
worked.
for Halloween, I'm dressed as peak band dad over here.
Okay.
Um, Shout out to Carrie Band Day. So it's funny, I was actually at Carrie Band Day and I snuck over to a place called Max Tavern to watch the first half of the Pitt UNC game. And sure enough, that Pitt UNC game was kind of going the way that I'm sure the most. How do I put the UNC fans that expect the worst for UNC football? Like they can't trust the team. Or like they can win any game, they can lose any game, and here we go with Pitt's super weapon ruining our season. How would you describe that, Lauren?
Oh, I thought you meant like a subset of them because I was like, you mean all of them?
Well, I mean, I feel like there is a subset of them that exists. I was actually having
The
a
lifers,
beer.
the lifers. Yeah.
Okay, yes, because
The lifers know.
I was having a beer with a mutual friend of ours, who is a UNC grad. That when Pitt had that first drive to score a touchdown, we're like, "Here we go!" But I'll say this about North Carolina under Mac Brown and what Pitt's Pat Narduzzi did not do in the third quarter: adjustments. And I know Mac Brown talked about it after the game, where like the run game wasn't going anywhere. So they just let Drake Maye cook and off they go, and they just routed Pitt the rest of the way. Meanwhile, Pitt was insistent on running the ball, which worked early. But credit to UNC's defense, which again in the third quarter has adjusted and has made some stops, complimentary football, as you like to say, that has allowed North Carolina's offense to get going. And because of that win, North Carolina is absolutely going to win the Coastal Division and take on Clemson in Charlotte.
No, it was funny the way it was playing out early. I remember seeing some of my UNC friends on my timeline insistent that Slovis was going to, who had looked like garbage the week before, was going to look great, and not because like he was going to have the game of his life or anything. It wasn't that. It
Mm.
was because of the defense. Like they were like, can't wait for him to put up Heisman numbers next week, basically, and it looked like that for a little while. It looked like it
Yeah.
was going to go that way. And yeah, Pat Narduz is gonna Narduz, like he can do nothing else but Narduz. Like that's
Hmm.
just who he is. You can't take the run game out of him.
No, you
They
can't.
tried. I mean, Kenny Pickett's the only quarterback that's been able to do it. And look what happened to the offensive coordinator that kind of, brought them in that direction. And so that is what it is at this point with them. And what have we said about the UNC defense, right? They need to just be okay.
Okay, that's all they got to do, and that's what they've been from the Notre
Yes.
Dame game. From the Notre Dame game on, which they got, as we discussed then, they got wrecked against Notre Dame. And that's an inflection point in any season. Either you're going to let this thing spiral out of control, or you're going to do what needs to be done. And it helps that the Coastal Division is trash. But as we talked about after the Notre Dame game, what we talked about after that game has held true. Drake Maye and that wide receiver group is dynamic enough that they should be able to make a serious run at the Coastal, and everything has opened up for them. The teams that needed to lose have lost for North Carolina to essentially, with 4 games left, just need 2 wins against their coastal foes, what at Virginia and then Georgia Tech, 2 teams that can't get out of their own way. In their most difficult games, which would be the Wake Forest game, I don't know what to expect out of Wake Forest now after I think they just turned it over again this morning. And with NC
Yeah.
State, knowing the dynamics of their offense, and they got a good enough defense, but I don't know if they can keep up with the way that North Carolina's offense has been playing. That they win 2 more games, which I expect them to do against Virginia and Georgia Tech, and it's just a matter of can they hang with Clemson? And it gets back to what I've been saying and what North Carolina fans understand. They're dynamic enough offensively where they've got a chance, and you just got to pray that DJ Uyunglele has another bad day like he did against Syracuse, and maybe you got a chance in Charlotte.
I mean, I think at this point for North Carolina, I'm not saying that they're going to be like, oh, we don't want to win an ACC championship game.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
but I think like getting there, considering what everybody was sort of expecting going into the season, I don't think there are a whole lot of fans that would be unhappy. And I don't think that a whole lot of fans are going to give the Coastal thing back. I mean,
No.
especially from like, you know, I mean, look at, I know NC State might not have struggled with Virginia Tech had they had a different quarterback. I know that's possible, but you know what? That's the worst team in the Coastal. It's the worst team in the league. And
it's Boston. No, Boston College is the worst team in the league. You can't lose. You can't lose. You can't lose to UConn.
Okay,
and like if you lose to UConn, that automatically makes you the worst team in the ACC. Straight up. Sorry.
But Bill Connolly put out stats this morning that NC State had one of the lowest post game win expectancies of the week.
Glad you brought that up.
So I'm not saying that they can't complain about divisions being what they are. I'm not saying that they're not hurt by a quarterback injury, but at the same time, if we're going to if you're going to come down on North Carolina fans about the Coastal, I don't know why you're acting like you'd wreck the Coastal when you barely beat the worst team in it.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to make this about Coastal versus Atlantic because you're not winning any fans.
All I'm saying is Carolina fans don't need to apologize for winning it to State fans. That's it.
Yeah. No, actually they should if I'm a North Carolina fan and you're into the rivalry, as we know in football they are, as the kids would say, send all the Cope Harder memes that you can. Okay.
Right.
Just as my 14-year-old would tell me, Cope Harder. Okay. So that's what I would do if I'm a North Carolina fan. It's kind of like, look, you talked about that win expectancy. Here's what Bill Connolly had tweeted out, right? So lowest post-game win expectancy in a win, meaning that the lowest chance of this team actually pulling it out, but did. And you know, Miami in the field goal fest that took place had a 19% win expectancy, ended up doing it. As you mentioned with NC State, Virginia Tech, that did not look like the Wolfpack was going to win that game. They managed to pull it out in the end once they let MJ Morris cook, which, as we talked about in the previous Panic Room, any NC State fans who want to see that, we talked about that for like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But then he also pointed out how funky the ACC has been this year in terms of teams that have won one more game than they should have this season per the post-game win expectancy. NC State's won 2.2 more games than expected. You got North Carolina, which is at 7-1 with 1.3. As you said, the ACC has been funky this year, and this just kind of bears it out. If it feels like it's been a weird season for you, Bill Connolly's stats show you that it's been a weird season.
Yeah, and we always do this with teams too. Like we look at a team like even North Carolina and some of the wins they pulled out, and we go, well, they could have easily lost X, Y, Z game, and that's true. And you know, State fans have even done some of that with their own team, looking back, and they're like, hey, this is our record, but we could have lost X, Y, Z game too. And so, I mean, there's at Clemson, you saw they were on that list too. They've had plenty they could have lost, and I mean, that's true and all, but you gotta have luck and be good. You know what I mean? And I think, like, for instance, with Syracuse, I'm not saying they're not a good team, right? But we saw what happened against Notre Dame, where I think some of their luck ran out a little bit too. And that's not to say that they're not good. I want to be clear, but at the same time, like, you see how you got to be both lucky and good. And at times, if your luck is covering up some of your other flaws, it's going to come back.
Well, you talk about, being lucky and good. Like, what is, and this is from Andrea Adelson over at ESPN, where she recaps, classic, where's my Elmo looking at a nuke explosion? This league, Wake Forest loses, as they put it, a thorough ass kicking to unranked Louisville, double-digit lopsided loss to Notre Dame, obviously. UConn, as I mentioned earlier, and then Miami and Virginia Tech playing 4 overtimes without scoring. That's peak Go ACC, by the way, without scoring a touchdown. All field goals.
The end of that game, I was riveted by it. I was riveted by the end of that game. I wanted it to somehow, like, someone have to intervene because they both kept trying 2-point conversions and neither one could get one.
Yeah. Well, the thing, to your point about luck, though, I mean, what else can you say about what happened to Wake Forest? We know what Wake Forest has been able to do offensively all year long. It's why we expected a track meet between the Tar Heels and the Demon Deacons. But you're sitting here, like, how else can you explain the fact that Sam Hartman committed 6 turnovers in the third quarter? They had, 8 overall in this game? And when you look at the first part of their season, the first 7 games of the season, they had just 5 turnovers total. if you're an NC State fan, you're probably looking at that going, oh, great. So you got it all out of your system before our game next week. Awesome.
That reminds me of actually the game where it wasn't that bad, but something similar happened with like Carolina, where he'd had like 2 turnovers all year and then he had like 3 and a quarter against Carolina or something. And yeah, I mean, it's too bad for Wake because there are a lot of people out there that are going to look for any reason they can think of to discredit them. Yeah. And I hate that this happened to them. I genuinely do, because it feels fluky in parts, but at the same time, that's Dave Clawson said it's an ass kicking. Like that's what happened to them. Louisville has been sneakily, like, I guess maybe Scott Satterfield decided against quiet quitting. Because remember, Boston College beat Louisville. Like, yes. You want to say like Virginia Tech is not the worst. Like Boston College did beat Louisville. I mean, that did happen. So yeah, like I guess he stopped quiet quitting and has just wanted to put some good resume film on I don't know what's happening in Louisville, but either way, they're playing a whole lot better. Their defense looks great after it looked like an absolute sieve to start the season. And that's how college football plays out sometimes. It's also why it's kind of hard to like establish narratives at the very beginning of the year and assume that they're all going to play out that way.
Right.
It's
well, let's look. You talk about narratives. I mean, we can bring it back to North Carolina. It was D. Leary delivers, right? That was the quiet quitting. It was a quiet Heisman campaign. Like, we're not saying it's a Heisman campaign, but it's a Heisman campaign. And Devin Leary's season wasn't a Heisman-worthy season even before the injury. And obviously, we know the rest. He got hurt, and he's done for the year. Drake Maye was expected to have a good season. I mean, there was a reason why people were hyping him up. And I never bought into the quarterback debate between him and Jacoby Criswell. I always chalk that up to Mac Brown talking up a good talk. But we knew
what I said about it. I was like, if that's true, then Drake Maye is not going to be very good. And that's nothing against Criswell, but it's like it shouldn't be a conversation.
But in this day and age, and I think I remember when we had this conversation. In this day and age, it's up to the coaching staff to make sure that the other guy gets talked up and has a chance because of the transfer portal. And I don't expect Jacoby Criswell to be with North Carolina next season. Probably. I think we all kind of understand, and that's fine. Good for him. Go find a place where he can play. I'm sure he's a good quarterback. We just haven't seen him. So we expected a good season out of Drake Maye. Gilio and I talked about at the beginning of the year. We were like, you know what, 8-4. A shot at the Coastal. That's possible for North Carolina. Now, the Coastal part is clearly correct. What might be true is that they're going to be a heck of a lot better than 8-4. And the reason why is because Drake Maye has been great, and other wide receivers other than Josh Downs have stepped up. There's a plethora of wide receiver options for Drake Maye. It's funny, I tweeted this last night, like every time I see an incredible catch like Green had last night with the one hand in the end zone, I always think, oh man, Josh Downs did it again. I'm like, oh wait, no, other dudes are doing Josh Down things, and that's scary. That's dangerous for the rest of the year. And you look at these stats, shout out to Ross Martin for getting this screen grab, where Drake, people are like, oh, why does Drake Maye belong in the Heisman conversation? I'm like, well, look at this. You look at the top, if Drake Maye were playing for Alabama, as he was supposed to, and you look at what's going on at Ohio State, you're sitting here telling me that Drake Maye shouldn't belong in the Heisman conversation. You can bring up the schedule all day, but you still got to go out there and produce. Everybody else in the Coastal, everybody else in the ACC has had an opportunity to pile up numbers like this. Sam Hartman was piling up numbers too, but obviously we know what happened in the third quarter, so he's out of that conversation. I blame Josh Graham for that, by the way. So I kid Josh. So yes, Drake Maye absolutely belongs in the Heisman conversation. You can't deny those numbers. And I know that might bother some fans in the ACC. It probably bothers NC State fans, but it gets back to what my 14-year-old say. Co-parter, guys, you can't deny these numbers.
Here's the thing. I think if things continue the way they've been going, I don't see a way he's not invited to New York, right? Mm-hmm. Now, for him to win, he's going to have to overcome a whole lot.
Yeah.
And
yes.
But one thing so far he has, and that's what? Record, right? Like if he gets to Heisman time and he's got 2 losses, and his stats, because his stats are pretty, like, I'm not saying that they're super far ahead of everybody, but they're pretty far ahead of a lot of people that are supposed to be the contenders for this. To overcome not being in Alabama or Ohio State or whatever, you have to beat a la Lamar Jackson. You have to be putting up the types of numbers that voters can't ignore. They can't just look at that and go, oh, well, it's just North Carolina and they're 8-4 or whatever it is. If they're not 8-4, and if he's putting up numbers that are that much better than everybody else's, that's absolutely going to put him in the conversation. And, I don't know that he'd win it even in that scenario because voters are the way that they are, but he's at least going to get, I think, some votes and maybe even make, top 2, top 3-ish. If things continue on the current trajectory, this is to be clear, because he's got no room for error. Let's be real.
No. We'll close the ACC Panic Room, tying up a loose end from Thursday night's NC State over Virginia Tech conversation, and you had gotten this. Well, yeah, we absolutely have to do this because you screen grabbed this, Brownlow.
I'm sorry.
You see that little don't focus on Ken's B. We'll get to Ken's B here in a second. Look at where it says Dave Doeren retweeted. That's NC State's football coach. And the tweet reads this is from the fan, to all the quote unquote fans that left early, you suck. If you left for the sole reason of the score, then please do not come to another game this season. This is not like the teams of the past. This Pac football team never gives up. They deserve fans that stay until 0-0-0-0. Go Pac. So Dave Doeren retweeted that. That has created a discourse on the internet.
Now, to be fair, the only reason I screen grabbed it is because he retweeted it, and it's not like I was going to keep it a secret. Like State fans who follow him would have seen the same thing.
They're going to see it.
Said Dave Doeren retweeted.
Yeah, I was going to say there's no shenanigans here. State fans follow Dave Doeren; they see that. There was some
right. I hope I don't get blocked, but I thought it was newsworthy because that's been a thing going on, and I felt the need in some way to stick up for State fans a little bit and to say that this hasn't been an easy watch. The last the last 2 quarters, this has been very difficult to watch, and that's just for us. That's been people who love the team. It's been a slog to watch, and it's been difficult. And that's not to say the team doesn't deserve support. It does. But to act like on a Thursday night when people have families and everything else, and they're seeing it play out, there are times when it felt like they couldn't even get a first down. At a certain point, people might just say, I can't do this anymore. And I just thought maybe that was the wrong game to flex on a little bit.
But Dave has a tendency to do that.
I know.
Dave, look, for the record, if anybody over at NC State is watching this, and I know you do, point being, I have zero problems with extremely online Dave Doeren. None. No. Okay? Because and the reason why I don't have
takes either, by the way.
Yeah, right. And the reason why I don't have a problem with extremely online Dave Doeren is because he'd say the same thing in the press conference.
Absolutely.
Okay. So he has a long history of saying, hey man, get your butts in the seats. Hey, shout out to the fans who stuck around. What they've retweeted is not newsworthy in the sense that it's consistent with what his consistent battle has been at NC State. But you know what? Dave's battling something that every other coach has battled at NC State. And, the State fans who were mad at the students for not being there late in the game when it was all coming back, that's another instance where you forgot what it was like when you were in college, okay? You're officially old now. If you're like, when I was a student, I stayed. Maybe you did. Good for you. But I know a lot of people back in college on I went to State. You know what people were doing on a Thursday night at NC State? They were going out. They were going to Pantana Bob's, okay? So, let's not act like students weren't doing the same thing back in my day. So stop with that. This is what I would say, though, to the Dave Doeren retweet. Are you going to retweet the one where the user said it was time to fire Tim Beck? Retweet doesn't always equal endorsement, right? You're going to retweet that one?
Stop it. Of course he can't do that.
Why not?
What do you mean, why not?
I mean, say it with your chest, man. You're just going to pick and choose? Is that what it is? Because that's also a thing that fans are clearly mad about.
I know.
Just saying. Because is NC State in this? Well, we'll tie it back to North Carolina because one thing I left out early because I think it's worth saying. You were talking about Narduzzi's going to Narduzzi, right? I don't think Mac Brown was subtweeting Pat Narduzzi in the postgame. But it did get into the dynamics that you love to talk about between Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator, and Mac Brown, the head coach, right? You've said it. What have you said about Mac and Phil Longo? Sometimes you're like, does Mac, like
Well,
get
they were
mad at
after
Phil,
some
right?
of those awful defensive performances, like where the offense scored like almost every time they touched it, he'd be like, well, that one thing they did wrong. And I'm like, and then he would like just say the defense tried their best. And I'd be like,
Right.
what? Huh?
Right. So Mac said in the post game, essentially he was like, yeah, I told Phil, stop trying to run the damn ball and throw it. Let's go. Right? You know, maybe Dave needs to tell Tim Beck that. Like, hey, dude, let's stop with this.
You know
Throw
what?
the damn ball with MJ Morris. Just saying.
I will say this about Dave. If he did, he wouldn't say it in a post-game press conference.
He would retweet it.
He might favorite a tweet.
Ooh, that's even better. I like that. That's even better.
Dave wouldn't say that about one of his coaches, in my opinion. That is one difference, I think, between Mac but Mac does it in such a folksy way that nobody
Right. Oh, nobody said, like, yeah,
they're
Mac
like, wow,
is
that was shade. Like, you never, it's good Southern shade is shade
right.
that you never realized was thrown at you until it's too late.
Mac is absolutely the best. And I'm not saying this sarcastically. I say this from sincerity. He is the best at that. That's
because
why
like the
people love him.
Narduzzi thing is such subtle shade, you know, like, well,
right.
We couldn't stop the pass, but they really wanted to run the ball. I don't even know if he meant to, but either way, it was the best.
Either way, Mac's hitting you with it. Bless your heart. I mean, that's essentially what he's doing.
Yes.
Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the ACC Panic Room. We'll see you all later.